2007. Atlanta, Georgia. A family struggling. A young man with a plan. A decision that destroyed everything. He told himself it was just one deal. Just enough to help his family. He was wrong about everything. The DEA had been watching for 8 months. Every move, every call, every deal. They had everything. 5 a.m. Tuesday morning, the door came down. And his family's life came down with it. His mother, his sister, his grandmother, all watching, all destroyed. This is their story. His name was Marcus Jr., 24 years old, living in a small rented house on the south side of Atlanta, Georgia, with his mother Patricia, his 17-year-old sister Keisha, and his 71-year-old grandmother Ruth. 4 people under one roof, all depending on each other, all trying to hold things together in a neighborhood where holding things together required more effort than most people on the outside ever understood. Patricia worked 2 jobs, a morning shift at a laundromat and evening shifts cleaning offices downtown. And still the money was never quite enough to cover everything that needed covering. Marcus had been working part-time at an auto repair shop since dropping out of community college the previous year. Not because he wanted to drop out, but because the hours he needed to work to help with bills made attending classes impossible. Grandmother Ruth had health issues that required medication, and medication cost money that the family frequently did not have in the amounts required. Keisha was doing well in school, genuinely well, the kind of student teachers noticed. And both Marcus and Patricia had quietly agreed without ever saying it aloud that protecting Keisha's future was the most important thing either of them could do. Marcus felt the weight of all of it every single day. The bills, the medication, the rent that was already 2 weeks late, the look on his mother's face when she came home exhausted at 11 at night and still had to be back at 6 in the morning. He was not a bad person. Everyone who knew Marcus said that, and they meant it. He was a young man who loved his family deeply and felt completely trapped by circumstances he had not chosen and could not seem to escape through legitimate means alone. In January 2007, a man Marcus knew from the neighborhood approached him with an offer. Simple, he said, low risk, good money, just moving product from one location to another, nothing more complicated than that. Marcus said no the first time, and the second time. But the third time the offer came with a number attached that would have covered 2 months of rent and Ruth's medication for the next quarter, and Marcus said yes. He told himself it was just one deal. Just this once. Just enough to get the family breathing again. Just temporary until something better came along. And he believed every word of it because he needed to believe it. The first deal went smoothly, the money appeared exactly as promised, and for 2 weeks Marcus felt something he had not felt in a long time. Like the pressure on his chest had lifted slightly, like he could breathe again. So when the second offer came, the decision was easier, and the third easier still. And by March 2007, Marcus was a regular participant in a distribution network that moved product across 3 Atlanta neighborhoods on a weekly schedule. He kept it completely hidden from his family. Patricia never knew, Keisha never knew, Ruth never knew. He came home at normal times, acted normal, helped with dinner, watched television with his grandmother on Sunday evenings like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Because 8 months before Marcus ever said yes to that first deal, the Drug Enforcement Administration had opened a federal investigation into the exact network Marcus had just joined. DEA agents had been building their case patiently and methodically: phone records, surveillance footage, informant testimony, financial tracking, constructing a picture of the entire operation from the top down. Marcus appeared in their files within 3 weeks of his first deal, identified through surveillance footage of a known handoff location on the south side, and agents added his name, his photo, and his address to the case file without him ever knowing. His phone was placed under a court-ordered tap in February 2007. Every call recorded, every text logged, every conversation with network members captured and time-stamped by federal agents sitting in a van 2 streets away. Marcus had no idea. He kept his phone on him always, used it for everything, talked openly about pickups and drop-offs and payment amounts, because he believed nobody was listening, and because he had never been taught what being watched by the DEA actually looked like. Agents tracked his movements for 6 weeks after adding him to the active surveillance list, building a timeline of every deal, every location, every contact, until they had more than enough evidence to act on. The decision to execute the raid was made in early March 2007, coordinated with simultaneous arrests of 11 other network participants across Atlanta, scheduled for a Tuesday morning at 5 a.m. when residents would be home and off guard. On the morning of March 6, 2007, Marcus was asleep in his room when the sound hit the entire house at once. Heavy boots on the porch, loud banging on the front door, voices shouting federal agents, search warrant, open the door. Patricia was in the kitchen making coffee before her morning shift. She froze at the sound, coffee cup still in her hand, not understanding for a full 3 seconds what she was hearing. Keisha came out of her bedroom in her school clothes. She had an early exam that morning. She had been up since 4:30 studying. And she stood in the hallway and watched the front door come open as Marcus emerged from his room half asleep. Ruth came to her bedroom doorway, supported by the wall, 71 years old, health already fragile, face completely white with fear as agents moved through the house in tactical gear with weapons visible. Marcus saw the agents and knew immediately. Not what they knew, not how much they had, but that it was over, that the thing he had told himself was temporary and controlled and manageable had just arrived at his mother's front door at 5 in the morning. He did not run, did not resist, did not say anything. He put his hands up slowly and let them put the handcuffs on while his mother stood 6 feet away with her hand over her mouth, and his sister watched from the hallway in complete silence. Agents searched the house for 3 hours, every room, every drawer, every cabinet, and found drug money hidden in a shoebox at the back of Marcus's closet, $14,000 in cash that he had been accumulating and hiding for 2 months. Keisha watched agents carry her brother's things out of his room in evidence bags, watched them take his phone, his clothes, documents from his desk, and she stood against the hallway wall with her arms wrapped around herself and did not move for a very long time. Marcus was taken out of the house in handcuffs at 5:47 in the morning. Neighbors were already at their windows, already watching, already talking. And Patricia stood in the doorway and watched her son put into a federal vehicle and driven away. She stood in that doorway for a long time after the vehicles left. The street quiet again, the neighbors retreating from their windows, holding the doorframe with both hands, not yet able to process the full weight of what had just happened. Marcus was charged with drug distribution, participation in a federal drug conspiracy, and possession of proceeds from drug trafficking, serious federal charges that carried mandatory minimum sentences under laws that had no flexibility regardless of circumstances. His court-appointed lawyer explained the charges clearly and without softening. The evidence was overwhelming, the phone recordings alone were enough to convict. Cooperation with prosecutors was the only path to any reduction in sentencing. Marcus cooperated, gave investigators everything he knew about the network, the contacts, the locations, the schedules, and it helped marginally, but the mandatory minimums still applied, and the judge's hands were largely tied by federal sentencing guidelines. In the summer of 2007, Marcus Jr. was sentenced to 12 years in a federal correctional facility, with eligibility for parole review after 8 years served, effective immediately upon sentencing. Patricia was in the courtroom when the sentence was handed down. She had taken the day off work, losing the pay, to be there, and she sat completely still when the judge spoke the number and did not cry until she was outside on the courthouse steps. The consequences for the family began before Marcus had even been transferred to his permanent facility. The landlord of the family home saw the news coverage of the raid and served Patricia with an eviction notice within 3 weeks, citing a lease clause about criminal activity on the premises, and Patricia, exhausted and broken, did not have the resources to fight it. She moved Ruth and Keisha into a smaller apartment across town, more expensive per square foot, worse neighborhood, further from Keisha's school, and took on a 3rd job to cover the increased costs. Ruth's health deteriorated significantly in the months following the raid. Doctors attributed the decline partly to stress and disruption, and she passed away 14 months after Marcus's sentencing, never having seen her grandson again after the morning they took him away. Keisha dropped out of school 3 months after the move. The commute was too long, the stress at home too heavy, the teachers at her new school less engaged with her than her previous ones had been, and the future her mother and brother had both been quietly protecting collapsed quietly and without ceremony. Patricia blamed herself for years, for not knowing, for not seeing the signs, for not asking harder questions when Marcus started having money she couldn't account for, even though there was nothing she could have done differently with the information she had. Marcus served 8 years before his parole review. He was released in 2015, 32 years old, returning to an Atlanta that had changed around him, and a family that had been permanently reshaped by what his decision had set in motion. Ruth was gone. Keisha was working 2 low-wage jobs and had never gone back to school. Patricia was still working 3 jobs at 61 years old because she had never been able to build the stability back that one Tuesday morning had taken from her. Marcus said in an interview years after his release, "I thought I was doing it for them. I told myself I was doing it for them, but I was doing it to them, and I didn't understand that until it was already too late to undo any of it." Drug-related federal charges carry some of the harshest mandatory minimum sentences in the American justice system, sentences that fall equally on the low-level participants and the network leaders, regardless of the individual's circumstances or the depth of their involvement. Families pay a price that no court ever formally acknowledges. The lost homes, the disrupted educations, the deteriorating health of elderly relatives, the children who watch their parents or siblings taken away and carry that image for the rest of their lives. Keisha was 17 years old on the morning she stood in that hallway in her school clothes with an exam to take, and she never fully recovered from what she saw, and no sentence handed down to Marcus or anyone else in that network ever addressed that. If you or someone you know is being pressured into participation in illegal activity, contact the FBI tip line or local law enforcement confidentially, because the consequences of saying yes extend far beyond the person making the decision.
Subscribe to Dark Chapters US, because there are many more chapters left to uncover, and none of them are easy to read.